spooky story, scary story marathon, and I'm very excited to do so. These stories can deal with some real world issues, so they are not for the faint of heart. Some of them are supernatural, some of them are realistic, or bring up real matters, so not for the faint of heart. Feel free to click off if that doesn't sound like it's your speed tonight. And with that, we will get started with this guy. Alright, the first story tonight is called The Wrong Parents. When I was little, I used to wake up in the middle of the night and go into my parents' room and sleep next to my mom. One night, when I was about 5 or 6, I had this really, really vivid dream where I woke up scared and went into my mom's room to sleep with her. When I went in, however, there were a set of parents in the bed and a set of identical parents on the floor. I instinctively knew in my dream that one set of the parents were evil. I had to wake the right parents because the wrong parents would hurt me. So I chose the parents on the floor. I distinctly remember thinking the evil imposter parents would try to trick me, so I chose the parents on the floor, thinking that they were the right ones. When I went over to the parents on the floor, they both opened their eyes, and where their eyeballs should have been, it was just a bright, glowing red light. That was when I actually woke up. Being a scared little kid, I of course went right into my parents' room to sleep next to my mom. There were a set of parents on the bed and a set of parents on the floor. I literally pissed myself. The second set of parents was actually a pile of unfolded laundry. But I will never forget the fear that struck my little 6-year-old heart at that very minute. I've definitely had dreams like that. The second story is called Mom, Is That You? Mine probably falls more into the weird category than anything else. In the mid-90s, my mom and I lived alone in a 2-bedroom apartment. I was in 3rd grade at the time. For starters, the closet in my room was weird. It had sliding doors and an elevated bottom 2 to 3 feet higher than the floor. Being the messy kid I was, the doors were always open and stuff was everywhere. So one night, I randomly woke up. I couldn't explain why, but something just felt off. I sat up in my bed and started looking around my room. Sitting in the closet was my mom. She just sat there perfectly still in her night clothes, straight backed with her hands on her knees. She was staring right at me. I called to her a few times, but she never moved and never acknowledged that I had spoken to her. After a while, I gave up and just laid back down to go to sleep. It was my mom, and I didn't feel threatened or anything. So, the next morning over breakfast, as I was digging into whatever sugar-filled awesome thing I was having, I asked Mom why she was sitting in my closet last night. She looked at me like I had lost my damned mind and asked me why she would sit in my closet. She said she hadn't left her room all night. My mom isn't much for fibbing or playing pranks, so I believed her, and it freaked me the hell out. I never left those closet doors open again. The third story is called The 29th Floor. For all those who work late nights in high rises. I was working late on a Saturday night on the 29th floor of my office building, alone of course, though that was not uncommon. Being almost 30 stories up and near the Pacific Ocean, there was a thick fog surrounding the upper part of the building, such that you couldn't see 10 feet out from the building, but if you looked down, you could see the lights of the city below. Nearly all of the lights in the office were off because they are controlled by passed by on the far side of one of the assistant's ledges diagonally out of my door. If you've worked in an office, you know what I'm talking about. The shape went into my colleague's office, and the light in her office, which is also controlled by motion detectors, went on. My colleague is short and has light brown hair, so I assumed I had caught a glimpse of her head as she was walking into her office. Bored, I immediately got up and wandered over to say hello. No one in sight. I looked at her light switch and saw that the manual override button, which turns the motion detector off, was popped out, so the lights that were shining in my face should have been off. The hairs went up on the back of my neck, and I walked back to my office and sat down. A minute or so later, I looked up and noticed that my colleague's light was now off again, and I got even more creeped out. So I sat there feeling uneasy for a few minutes, listening for sounds of activity in the office, thinking someone was around and triggering office sensors, but alas, there was no one there. Probably to make myself feel better by breaking the uneasy silence, I stood up and walked to the door of my office and called out, "Hello." No response, no activity, nothing. So I walked back to my office and boom, the light in my colleague's office goes back on, and the silence is shattered by the phone in the conference room between our offices suddenly ringing. This was extremely unusual because the conference room can only be dialed from inside the firm. At this point, I have an acute case of the willies, and I go back into my office and sit there while the phone rings and rings for at least 10 minutes. I tried to focus on my work so I could get the hell out of there, but that infernal phone would not stop ringing. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore, and I walked into the dark conference room, and, wouldn't you know, the lights didn't go on like they should have, and always do. I'm 2 seconds from peeing my pants by the time I reach the phone, and look down to see that the digital display does not show any incoming call. The phone is just ringing all by itself, and has been for 10 minutes. I pick up the phone, and in the manliest voice I can muster, say, "Law firm name." Not only is there no response, there was a dial tone, as if no one was ever on the other line, which destroyed my desperate hope that some idiot in another office had dialed the wrong extension. I turned around and went to my office as fast as I could, noticing over my shoulder that my colleague's light had turned on again, but right when I looked at it, it turned off. I get back into my office and resolve to get the F out of there, so I collect my stuff, walk to my door, and just as I'm about to hustle down the hallway to the elevators, I call out, "I'm leaving, see you later." Instantly, the light goes on in my colleague's office, the lights in the conference room go on, and bam, the phones in the conference room and my colleague's office phone start ringing. All of the hairs on my body stand on end, and I feel the blood drain from my head. I raced to the elevator, jumped on, and as the doors closed, I could still hear the phones ringing in the distance. Okay. The next one is called The Truck. We have never figured this out, and now the 3 living witnesses have to be good and effing drunk to discuss the thing. I was 7, my brother was 10, my mom in her early 40s, my grandmother, which is my mom's mom, in her 60s, so we were all cogent. No one was too young or too senile to not recall this nonsense, yet still, no bloody answer. Grandma lived on an isolated country road in North Carolina that was named after her family since they were the only ones who lived on the land for about 1,000 acres. And they were crazy. We have stories about relatives that start with, "You remember that time Uncle Bob was in the ditch with a shotgun?" Which time? Her house had been empty for several weeks while she'd been visiting us in Florida, but we were all back, spending the weekend with her before trekking back to the Sunshine State. The house is in the for real country, literally over train tracks, past a salvage yard, and her nearest neighbor, a cousin, everyone is related to everyone who owns a house on the road, isn't within screaming distance. Yeah, that seems to be a real system of measurement. Screaming distance. It's early in the morning, like just before daybreak. We're awake because these are are farm freaks who wake at the crack of dawn from sheer ingrained habit. We're eating cereal when we hear someone pull up outside. So curious, we all run to the big picture window that looks onto the front yard. There's a strange truck there. No one seems to be behind the wheel, but the engine is idling. The truck is, well, it's old for one thing. It's old-timey, like maybe from the 1930s. You could picture the Joad family heading up to California in this thing. It's rusted, but it was probably once painted blue. We stare at the thing, bewildered. Mom asks Grandma if she knows who it is. Nope, not a clue, Grandma says. She wants to get the phone to call her cousin and ask him to come up. She thinks maybe it's a hired hand and he's just at the wrong farm. Just as she asks him to come down, the phone goes dead. Well, that's unsettling. All at once, there is a loud, insistent banging on the front door. We all scream. My grandma, who is terrifyingly resourceful, huddles us all into the living room, away from a window where anyone can see us. Then, while Mom, me, and my brother tremble there on the couch, she grabs a serrated bread knife from the kitchen and cautiously approaches the front door. She peeks out a side window very stealthily. She turns back to us and looks confused. She shakes her head like no one is there. We all breathe easier. Then, every goddamn door in the house is banging relentlessly. I can still hear it, rhythmic and terrifying, like all the doors are about to splinter and crack. There were 2 doors in the basement beneath us, so the sound is also a reverberation at our feet. The 3 ground floor doors are shaking. We can see them trembling and jerking on their hinges from the vantage point on the couch. Finally, Mom runs to the window, either from a psychotic break with reality or terror. I have no clue. She cries, "Oh, thank the Lord, cousin is here." We run to her and peek out the picture window. There's no one that we can see in the yard, but we can't see all the doors from our viewpoint. Cousin walks by truck with a shotgun in his hand. Cousin, it should be noted, has pretty much every gun ever made. He looks puzzled, looking at the back of the truck. Then he glances in the cab window and stops. He goes pale, runs a hand down his face. Then he runs towards the house, towards us. My grandma flings open the kitchen door as she sees him coming. He shouts, "Everyone get behind the couch, get down." He runs past us as we bolt for the couch. The banging starts again, all the doors, and now we can hear the windows rattle. It's like a tornado or the end of the world. We are too scared to even scream. Cousin flings open the front door and fires the huge shotgun once. Bang, deafening. As he does, the truck roars to life, and it sounds like a train. We scramble up. The banging stops mercifully. Cousin is advancing onto the lawn, gun leveled at the truck. We run behind him, wanting to be out of that shaking, quivering house and near the dude with the gun. The truck peels out backwards, cutting across the yard and racing into a breakneck speed. Tires squeal, rubber is burned. Cousin fires again, and we all cower behind him. He blows out the back window, and with the sound of 1,000 plates smashing into linoleum, the truck never even hiccups, just roars down the road. No tags, not even a vanity plate on the back. There was no one behind the wheel of that thing. We had a clear view. Everyone agreed. Not a driver in the cab. Well, nothing we could see, anyhow. The police were called. Cousin had to go home to his house to call. This was pre-cell phones. The phone line had been cut. There was not a single boot print in the entire yard except Cousin's from where he'd run into and out of the house. Cousin reported that there had been no plate, but when he looked into the cab, it looked like something from a horror movie. He said there were all kinds of weird restraints, handcuffs, clamps, straps, and he said the floorboards looked covered in what smelled like blood to him. Cousin was famous for his keen sense of smell, and the window was down, so it's possible. Cousin said he thought he saw a blur of something coming out of the picture window and ran to fire the first shot, but missed because once he stood there, nothing or no one was on the lawn or in the truck. Then it shot backwards out of the yard and out of our lives, leaving no answers, just a deep sense of unease every time we'd visit. Grandma and Cousin have passed. Deeply religious people, they stuck by their unchanging versions of the story until they died. My brother, mother, and I have never been able to figure it out. Neither did the cops, I think it should be noted. We don't know how all the windows and doors were banging, and we don't know why we never saw a soul anywhere, or how they could get around the sides of the house without leaving a trace in the damp earth. The last one is called John. My freshman year of college, I attended a small, women-only liberal arts college in Virginia. It's gone co-ed in the last few years, but at this point it wasn't. I'm from California and was a little worried about being alone on my own so far from home, so I requested a room in the dorm's no-man hallway. The other residents were a bunch of girls like me, mostly freshmen, all of us from religious or otherwise conservative households. The only men allowed in the hallway, besides the occasional father moving things in and out for his daughter, were maintenance workers, and they had to announce themselves by bellowing, "Man on the hall," whenever they came up. From day one, something was wrong with that hallway. It started with an eerie feeling of being watched and escalated into things like radios and the showers in the communal bathroom at the end of the hall being turned on and off, apparently of their own free will. Things being moved around girls' rooms, that kind of thing. Typical haunting stuff. It started out as very benign, and we all joked about it, how we had representatives of the 3 major religions on the hall, and at least one of us should be able to perform an exorcism if need be. So, September and most of October passed with general activity, and then things began to get creepy. The entire hall was woken in the middle of the night when someone ran up and down, banging on every door. You'd walk into the bathroom to find every tap on, full blast, spewing hot water. Radios that had never acted up before would be turned on, and it was starting to get nasty. It would pull our hair when we were out in the hall talking, or push us in the bathroom, or whatever. Nothing terrifying, but alarming. And worse, it moved out of the hallway and bathroom and started coming into our bedrooms more and more. So I was really scared, but trying to be brave and not tell my family about the ghost. My mom got the story out of me one night when we were talking on the phone, and I admitted to being scared. My mom is pretty sensitive to spirits, and she was alarmed. I tried to play it off as no big deal and went about my college life. The next day, I came back to the dorm from class, walked into my bedroom, and there was a man sitting in my desk chair. He was not a flesh and blood man either. He was more of a shadow and outline, but I could see him clearly. I think I stood in my doorway for about a year and a half, staring at him until he raised a hand at me. Raised a hand, like he was greeting me, inviting me in. I freaked out and ran down to the bathroom where all the showers were running. There was no one else home on the hallway. From that day on, he was always there, sitting in my room. If I was bopping around with my iPod, I'd see him sitting on my chair or on my bed. If I needed the chair, he'd move to the desk or sometimes to my roommate's bed. I never saw him clearly. He was always a shape, an outline, more of an impression than anything else. But he was there, and he was real, and eventually I started to call him John. He was tall and kind of thin, and he gave me the impression of an older gent who wore cardigans and a tie, like Gregory Peck as Atticus Finch. I liked John. Because here's the thing, from the day he arrived in my dorm room, whatever was on that hallway left me alone. It would still run around and bang on every door, except mine. It would mess around with everyone's stuff, except mine and my roommates. Everyone else's room phone would ring and have no one on the other end, never mine. I didn't mention John to anyone. I was having a rough time, my roommate and I were fighting, and I was realizing that I really didn't like college that much. One night around Thanksgiving, some church friends and I watched The Ring as an activity, and then they dropped me off the back of the dorm. I felt sick walking in like I was being watched. All the way down that long hallway to my room, I could feel whatever was there watching me waiting. All the lights were on, but I was so scared that I thought I was going to cry. I made it to my room, curled up in my bed. My roommate was gone for the weekend, and wished that I were home. I could hear the thing outside running up and down the hallway. I had just watched a scary movie. I was 18 and small and scared. I got my blankets up around me and just cried. After a while, I realized I wasn't alone. My personal ghost was sitting on the bed with me, and somehow I knew that as long as he was there, whatever was in the hall would not come into my room and would not hurt me. For whatever reason, he was protecting me. On my last morning at the college, I got up at 4 o'clock to meet a taxi to take me to the airport. I got dressed, ate a bowl of cereal in the tiny kitchen, put the empty bowl in the sink, and walked back to my room to bring my suitcase down to the elevator. As I waited for the elevator, something in the kitchen behind me exploded. I walked over to the doorway and looked in. An egg in a pot had been heated until it cracked. The ring on the stove that it stood on was red hot. I'd been standing in that kitchen 3 minutes before, and there hadn't been anything on the stove. No one else was awake. I turned back to the elevator and saw John standing next to my suitcase. The doors opened, and we walked inside, and he was with me all the way across campus to the taxi by the front doors of the main building. I was so relieved to leave that place behind me as I drove away, though at that point I was still planning on returning in January. Spoiler, I didn't. At home in California, I told my mom everything, from my disappointment in the college as a whole to the haunting. I told her about the thing in the hallway and about how it never came into my room after my own personal guardian angel showed up. I described how he would sit in my chair and keep watch, and she laughed. Sounds like my great-granddad, she said. When I was little, he'd always keep an eye on us kids. He didn't like bullies, and he had no patience at all with the supernatural. He believed in it, but he didn't like it haunting us. The entire side of the family is Mormon, and they all believe in and have had experiences with ghosts. My great-grandfather, who I'd never even heard of, apparently had no problem with performing exorcisms or casting out spirits, and was widely believed to be good at it. He was fiercely protective of his family, too. He died when my mom was a teenager in the late 60s, and his name was John.